Hey guys, my name is Nick, and I'm bringing you today a video on my thoughts about fulfillment as a concept and what it looks like in our modern day social climate. Before that, however, I would like to preface this out of the blue video with a little information about myself. Um, this is a lightly scripted beginning to the video to help me kind of get back into practice with making videos. One of the first things you'll notice looking at my channel is a several years old episode of my podcast titled After the Channel Book Blaze, which this channel was created to revolve around. I don't currently have any plans to revive the podcast, although the template and the ideas still appeal to me and could definitely be incorporated in different forms into future ideas for the channel. If there's enough demand for it, we can always bring it back. But presently, I'm more interested in publishing shorter form and more snappy content while I build towards my 50 subscribers. Um, the minimum requirement to start streaming, which I'd like to do. Um, Live streaming in the same tone and content wheelhouse as this video. Philosophical, conversational, and as per my own interests, with a bent towards linguistics and literature centered, asides from the topic. Um, Finally, I'd be remiss not to mention my biggest influences on this platform, being the Deep Fat Fried podcast and namely its host, Paul Zigo, and his Ideology and Poltergeist streams. Um, you guys will catch my channel interacting with their content semi regularly, as well as an offshoot streamer from their community, Phoebe Ophi, whose streams you'll occasionally also catch me in and moderating over there as well. With all of that aside, I am minimizing what I have for a script to start the video off. Um, because, like I said, I'm a dude who loves to talk philosophy, ideas, and, not just conceptual, but how they pertain to our daily lives. And so this is an off the cuff kind of video with just a loose, loose brainstorming session to fuel me on this. But I'm thinking about fulfillment. And I think everybody's pretty much thinking about fulfillment, right? Um, we don't live in a natural society anymore. In a sense, we do, right? All the rules and technology and structures, societal trappings around us, familial constraints and units, all of it, I guess, is very much down the road from the natural human tendencies and habits, So in a sense, everything is natural, right? But what I'm talking about is, well, we all get it, right? We all sort of crave um, more of an ancestral, or at least parts of an ancestral sort of way of living that we feel like is all natural, People living in caves, people living out of um, minimalistic wood-built forest shelters, subsistence, hunting, hunter-gatherer living. I think that modern people really crave aspects of that because it is, you could say that that's the most natural type of fulfillment for a person. That's our most basic way of interacting with the world. And, people don't get as much of that anymore as they'd like to. What used to be the basic, threadbare sort of, you know, maybe you get 2 to 3 decades of a life that way and then you die of, tooth rot, maybe getting bashed in the head and dying of brain bleed or something, a very natural way to live, but also brutal in the same ways it's beautiful and simple. Um, and it is a trade off. People crave the only light exposure you get is natural sunlight. People crave constantly having a beautiful vista to look upon, the forest or the world as viewed from the top of a mountainside, seaside, but living outside with the ceiling being the sky and the Earth's atmosphere. People crave that, and I think that we are so detached from that lifestyle. Those of us who get to live that way are privileged because of, coming up to a place of power, privilege, and stability within our modern society, the cash centered society, the fiat currency centered society that we live in. And I don't think that's just an American thing, although, my perspective is as an American. I think that's every country on this planet. I think the people who get to spend the most time out in nature um, come at it from a place of power and privilege for the most part. Um, Certainly, as opposed to, like I mentioned, that being a very sometimes meager, often meager way for people to live, going back to our ancestry before, even before having cracked the code of linguistic expression and communication with each other, uh, beyond hunting and mating calls and cries and grunts and, very remedial, very basic caveman kinds of things. Uh, but let me get back on to the sort of setting the structure for this conversation. What is fulfillment? And why don't I use a word like happiness or contentedness? Because people use these phrases pretty interchangeably, right? When I talk about fulfillment, you might just sub in the word happiness or contentedness, and you're more than welcome to do so. But I'm a guy who likes to be a little more precise and on the nose with what I'm talking about. I feel like it gives me more mileage. So, yeah, contentedness and happiness are routed into what we're talking about with fulfillment. Um, Fulfillment, I think, is I view it as sort of a state of being where someone has achieved a happiness or where someone regularly has exposure to happiness. People sort of view happiness as one channel of emotion, perhaps a reward, a treasure, an outcome, or a result. Um, Fulfillment I view as more of a lifestyle, sort of an ingrained pattern of habits. And I view fulfillment as more of a worthy thing to talk about in terms of, how do we achieve fulfillment? Um, and where do we derive it from, especially in the modern age? Um, in the 21st century, fulfillment looks a lot different, certainly from the roots of humanity. Like I said, hunter gatherer, subsistence living. But I think fulfillment, even insofar as the, people in my age range, I'm a millennial and Gen Z cusper, um, people around the 30 mark or younger of age, fulfillment looks a lot different in how we achieve it and how we build towards that lifestyle and habitual way of living than even our parents, looked at fulfillment. Uh, the truth of the matter is that we live within a society where we know we pretty much know at least what the system ascribes That is to say, the metrics that our system ascribes to fulfillment, right? And we know that we stand a pretty good chance of having fulfillment if we have more money, more free time, a job that provides both of those things. And that is one of the biggest adjectives you'll see people craving for and hungering for and looking for in a job and in a career is a fulfilling one. You hear people say all the time, and I'm just as apt and prone to saying it myself. I'd love to trade in this job for one that's more fulfilling. And people will even compromise with a pay cut if they can have an increase in fulfillment of a job. Um, at the same time, I think a lot of us can view and see that our capacity to meet those metrics, or the tools that we're given to meet those fulfillment metrics, free time, money, and how we can apply those to our families and our creative endeavors and our passions and our hobbies, and having a what feels like a fulfilling career. Those means are sort of, well, really rather diminished from our parents. I am big on kind of losing the light here. Sorry, guys. We're still working on fine tuning my recording setup here. I'm using my lower resolution laptop webcam in lieu of my external webcam, which was giving me better resolution but a lot less light. So we're working on it, guys. Give me a couple of videos to perfect my setup a little bit. But back on topic, I am big on talking about and analyzing the concept of a social compact. Um, and I really feel like we, in the current year in America, have strayed away from any real sense of a social compact. I suppose we're still hanging on to the threads of a social compact that keep everybody from walking out of their job and flipping over the nearest car and setting fire to things. But I do feel that we live in a very socially reclusive society. Um, as opposed to our parents. You will hear our parents, if you're at the 30-year-old mark or a little bit younger, talk about what the expectations were in your mid to late 20s. And that was typically family, and a reasonable expectation that an individual, or certainly a working couple of parents, would be working towards, at least in their 30s, owning a property, having a home on a plot of land to raise their family on, usually suburban, but I think also a lot more of inherited farmland and ability to be an agricultural family as well, which has become a lot more of, again, sort of a luxurious lifestyle for people in our age range to be able to participate in. I do remember my father and his family. I'll talk about being raised up farming, and that wasn't exactly a luxurious lifestyle for them, but it was a subsistence that they were able to do, even when it was a struggle, and even when it, was the only way for the family to eat and have an income. They were able to do that and pass that down for generations. Um, but that farmland has been sold off, and it's not an avenue that's available to me and my siblings, and that knowledge of how to do those things was never passed on, never taught to us, and that's because it's not, much of a reality for us anymore. And it that reality, became less realistic even for my parents and my father. Let me just give us a little more light here. There, that's a little better. Um, so yeah, fulfillment. I'm not here as any sort of a guru. I certainly don't want anybody to leave my videos with a sense of hopelessness, but I also am not here to sell you a lifestyle. I'm certainly not here to sell you my lifestyle. I'll give you my anecdotes from my life as to how I chase and can feel a sense of fulfillment, but at the end of the day, I'm not a board certified um, psychologist. I'm not licensed in mental well being, and I'm not selling you a fake hustle, so I can't give you a blueprint towards fulfillment, and I don't think any of those people can do it for you either. So, I'm here to share concepts and hear what you guys have to say on these things. But I'm also not here to blow smoke up your ass and peddle you fake positivity either. I acknowledge the negative and maybe even pessimistic realities of our society because I operate with, in, and around them myself, and I accept them to the degree that I can move beyond, the unfortunate constraints that keep us, running around in a rat race, chasing our own tails, not sure if we're doing the right things to be fulfilled or wondering what fulfillment is. I deal with all of those things as well. And I won't tell anybody that the way I deal with these pressures and societal constraints is what anyone else should do, but I will share my perspectives on it. Um, the traditional societal metrics that we were raised here in America and in my age range to believe have pretty quickly become hard, and a lot of the methods of reaching them are antiquated. I think a lot of young people don't feel like they've got a steady, reliable blueprint to achieve those things, and sometimes even when we feel like we've crafted the blueprint for it, some amazing revolution of technology comes along like AI, and regardless of whether these things can be incorporated into the blueprint, the blueprint, it can be really frustrating for people to feel like a match has been set to their bare bones accommodation that they've created just to try and feel like they have a framework to work within and to help them conduct themselves in society, to feel like they're working towards something, the sense of fulfillment that we were taught about and taught to reach for, but ill prepared through no fault of our parents, but simply the fact that they handed down a blueprint to us for a world that it doesn't operate in the same way as the one we inhabit anymore. So here's the thing. Yeah, we all have to pay the rent and we all need money, and you should try and have money. You should try and have an emergency fund, right? But a lot of people don't, or they have a very minimal one that's poorly suited to a lot of the emergency needs that could crop up for them. But at the end of the day, I don't think that stops people from having a sense of fulfillment. There is always the grass is greener effect. And we can always say if I had more money, I would be more fulfilled. And I'm not here to tell you that money won't solve your problems up to a certain point. Money provides a certain sense of security. But look at it this way also. That is also a construct, a mental sort of coping mechanism that is antiquated more so in the current age, you know, as opposed to our parents' time. What I mean by that, and it may sound pessimistic, but I sort of view it as an optimistic thing. So I'm not telling you to make money and chasing financial and career stability. I'm not telling you to make that the core and only thing that your life revolves around. Um, but I'm also not telling you to totally disregard it. It has its place, and I think it has a different place in our lives in 2025 going into 2026 than it did with our parents because of the existential threats that we face that were not as prevalent and as acknowledged in our parents' times. I mean, we're talking environmental disasters. We live in the middle of a mass extinction event. And to be real with you, I don't believe that humanity will look anything like what it looks like now come the year 2100. I mean, I could live to see the year 2100, but I think that by then, I don't think most of us who are aware and accepting of the scientific data around what we have done to the planet as a species, I don't think any of us have any rose tinted picture of what the year 2100 will look like. I think that probably the most optimistic view of humanity by then will be, you know, a return to monkey, a return to um, subsistence living in the few patches of nature that are unspoilt enough to be able to be tended into a natural environment for the remaining humans after the catastrophic fallout of what we've wrought upon the planet. Those are my true thoughts, and you guys might view it as pessimistic, but I think that a worse off potential future for humanity is that we're still trying to string this thing along, this thing that has become a corporate capitalistic hellscape, that's become, you know, corporate control, corporate oligarchy, corporate ownership, corporate chokehold on people's everything, their livelihood, when there is still an amount of abundance that could be distributed to people to give everybody a rather uniform sense of well-being. Distribution of pretty much happiness or the means to more easily achieve sustainable happiness. Um, that distribution was more generous the further you look back at our ancestors and our parents and grandparents, or at least so it feels. I mean, distribution and also what is being demanded back from that distribution as the means of paying rent and affording food, right? And nobody's going to tell you that wages have not gone up since then, but we also know that inflation and the cost of everything else has gone up by such a higher degree, and it has that increase has way outpaced wages. You know, so what I'm saying here is that the future, it is not. I think a lot of us in this generation have stopped looking at, you know, can we avert all of these crises and more of which one catches up to us first? And again, I'm not. I come from a philosophical viewpoint, a non-religious one, that doesn't view this as a necessarily pessimistic thing. I think that I've felt the most pessimistic about our world and about these things when I didn't openly admit and try to face these things and then accept them and then just live my life in the way that I'm able to without feeling this deep, secret, unexpressed anguish over these existential crises. And so, in a long, rambling way of saying it, acknowledging that that is what will become of our species, that helps to bring me a sense of fulfillment, or at least tweak the scales of fulfillment, right? I love to read, I love to write, I love to be out in nature when I can, in between working and side gigs and recuperating from what I have to do to make a living and bring in an income. And I do seek to do financially better for myself, but I also don't I just don't pin everything on that anymore, because I realize that with the state of our world, by the time I'm 40 and 50 and 60, I could have achieved those things only for the environment around us to be at such an undermined state where, yeah, say I have $10 million, but also say that the environment gets to a point where $10 million, can't extract an exorbitant and luxurious lifestyle from the environment, because the ocean is plastic soup with a couple of sardines and mostly jellyfish, right? Floating around, and most of the elk population, right, has rampant disease. It's just sort of a mindset where, you know, keeping these things in mind, I don't look for an ultimate happiness. I don't look for a forever happiness. I don't look at happiness as how I should feel all the time. And that's more of a cliched sort of wisdom, right? Yin and yang. Uh, how many times have you heard in your life a philosophy like this? There's good within bad, and bad within good. There's pain within healing, and healing within pain. You have to, wherever you cast a light, there is shadow. But shadow doesn't exist without light, nor light without shadow, right? But there's hearing that, and then there's internalizing it. And so that is, if that makes any sense to you, my sort of philosophy, which I have long, over a decade now, coined optimistic nihilism. And I will give a shout out again to a streamer that I watch often, Paul Zigo. Paul Zigo, of Hideology, of the Poltergeist channel, of Deep Fat Fried, Once Upon a Time of Drunken Peasants. I heard him use this term recently in a stream. I believe it was a Hideology stream on the Poltergeist channel, although it might have been a Deep Fat Fried. And I was over the moon enthusiastic to hear him use it. I am a 27-year-old, and I remember sort of coining this phrase to try and feel more validated in being a nihilist as my core philosophy when I was like 19 and 20, and to hear Paul use such a phrase, as a guy that I really look up to in the streaming YouTube world, and as somebody who espouses a lot of things I agree with that sort of strike home with my philosophies, and as Paul being, someone who shares ideas that help me think about and reflect on mine, and gives me material to sort of go on and stimulate me. It was awesome to hear him sort of share an intellectual phrase that I coined as just just an up and coming whippersnapper like a decade ago. But that optimistic nihilism is what I call my philosophy. And again, I'm not a guru. I don't think that this works for everybody. I don't think that this works for people who have a very integral core Christian belief structure. I don't think it typically works for them. I think it's pretty antithetical. But when we're talking about fulfillment, you know, I think that, well, I know that that's a philosophy that I've built up to my entire life. And it's a different scale for measuring fulfillment. Like I said, I don't seek an everlasting happiness, which is sort of a Christian promise, of the afterlife. And that's not to dog on Christianity, but just to highlight in life, I seek what I can get in life, and I don't strive towards anything after life. I don't believe in anything after life. And so, with this sort of optimistic nihilism, I actually believe that it is closer to the natural human mindset all the way from the days of ancestry, from hunter-gatherer subsistence living. Do I know that to be true? No, but what I know is that I try not to live, and it's hard with a human fucking brain, even an optimized human brain, which I don't claim to have. I certainly don't claim that mine is optimized and streamlined and, proofed against all of these sort of existential worries that we have. But my philosophy allows me to sort of go through life understanding that death, at the snap of cosmic fingers is always around the corner. Not just climate stuff, but not to go too off track. I should wrap this video up soon. But have you guys heard of this recent revelation? If I'm understanding it correctly, this recent scientific astrological breakthrough that has sort of confirmed the fact that we live within this sort of less dense bubble within the universe. And if I'm understanding it correctly, science has more or less proven, I believe, the false vacuum theory. So there's another existential dread that we could be dreading every day of our lives, right? Living within a false vacuum means that the whole thing, the whole however many light years of space that our little bubble of less dense cosmic spatial area that our little bead of Earth is settled within, the whole thing could just burst under high pressure any minute, Just another existential threat. But these things, I take them in stride. Those threats are as natural to my life as breathing, and, they haven't happened. So until they happen, I don't have any excuse for not trying my hardest to achieve fulfillment. And that's my philosophy on it. I think I'll stop rambling. I think coming up on 34 minutes on this recording, I think 35 will do it just fine. If you stayed the whole way through, I really appreciate you guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Any interaction is really appreciated. I'm going to try and come at you guys through less of a potato cam next time. Like I said, I'm sort of alternating depending on the time of day and how much lighting I have, which of my cameras gives me a better product quality. But for the time being, having what I think 15 subscribers right now, I'm happy. I'm happy with how this turned out, and I hope you guys are too. All suggestions are welcome as to what I can do, production quality wise and idea wise on this channel. But I hope you guys like what you got with this video. because come 50 subscribers, I intend to live stream and interact with you guys, whoever wants to show up in exactly this kind of way. So, I think I'll be ending it off, you guys. Sort of a one sitting, probably minimal editing video for this time, but you might see some editing in the future videos to come. So, again, you guys, my name is Nick, and I mean, damn, if you really stuck out the 35 minutes and counting on 30 seconds of this video, I really appreciate you guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.